Hello, this is Tracks of Our Queers. My name is Andy Gott, and each episode I'll talk to a guest about one song, one album, and one artist that have soundtracked their life as a queer person. Kris Andrew Small is a visual artist based in Sydney, known for his exuberant and joyful work for clients including Adidas, Apple, Adobe, and my previous podcast, Oral Fixation. We got him before he hit the big time. Kris often takes societal issues and channels them through loud and abstract visuals, and I was particularly drawn to the distinct influence in his work from queeros like Keith Haring. If you don't yet know his work, have a quick scroll on his Instagram before you listen. It will all make sense. This conversation was recorded together in person in the studio on Gadigal Land in Sydney. If you enjoy this episode, please subscribe, leave a rating or review in your app, or even better, tell a friend. Tracks of Our Queers is an entirely independent production, so if you would like to help keep the podcast ad-free, you can shout me a coffee via a link in the show notes. Every penny goes to episode production. Now over to Kris. Kris Andrew Small, welcome to Tracks of Our Queers.
Thanks for having me. I feel like it's a long time in the making.
It's been a really long time in the making, and we will get onto that, but you're here. The main thing is we're here together right now.
Yes, it's very exciting.
How did you find music when you were growing up? Where did you get it from?
I think the car radio is probably the first place I was exposed to music, and the first song I remember, like ever having any reaction to, is Ace of Base, All That She Wants.
She leads a lonely life. She leads a lonely life.
That's the first memory I've ever had of just listening to music, and I do remember listening to music a lot in the car.
And where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Brisbane in like turbo suburbia, But it was quite pretty in hindsight. Like, it wasn't a super affluent neighborhood, but it was right at the end of the city, so it was next to the bush, and there was like kangaroo, all the cliches. And then because we were at the end of Brisbane, they would land tourist hot air balloons in the park next to our house. So I'd be driving to school and there'd be like 6 hot air balloons landing, and very surreal.
Do you remember what music you were listening to when you started to feel different?
This is the funniest thing, and this is why I chose one of the people we're going to talk about tonight, is I don't think that I was necessarily looking for music that was queer or music that sat in that world, but I was looking for outsiders, I guess. And so I think the first music I probably gravitated towards was Ace of Base, let's say. And then I think ABBA, probably through my mum. Because I remember my mum would listen to ABBA so much, and my dad would listen to The Doors. And I quite like The Doors in hindsight, but obviously I was more drawn to ABBA. Like, who isn't? And I don't remember us listening to much Madonna or Michael Jackson or Prince or any of these. But then once I started picking my music, it was weird. Like, I liked Rammstein and Slipknot and Red Hot Chili Peppers and all the bands you weren't supposed to like. But then, as time went on, obviously I discovered Aqua. And I think that I remember buying the Aqua album, I think it's called Aquarium, and I remember putting it under a Red Hot Chili Peppers CD at the till, thinking like, oh, they won't see both, even though he's obviously going to scan both. But I think that was probably the first album I chose to buy and was like, okay, like, I'm committing to this. I'm embarrassed as fuck by it, but I'm committing.
What's that incredible Turn Back Time?
Yeah, I mean,
it's a really good song.
I always thought, not to discredit Aqua, but if you take away the cheesiness of it, they were like unbelievably good songwriters, as most Scandinavian pop bands are. Like that, they knew what they were doing, and Turn Back Time is an amazing pop song.
If only I could turn back time, I would stay for the night.
You were having a real Scandinavian moment with
Yeah,
your
I
Ace
do
of
love
Base and Aqua.
Scandinavians. I mean, my partner's Scandinavian now. I always think that Australia and Scandinavia are quite similar in a lot of ways, which is weird because they're geographically completely different. And Like, for example, I was just in Sweden at Christmas, and Savage Garden is massive in Sweden, like bigger than they probably were anywhere else.
Wow.
And it sounds Scandinavian, especially when you're in Scandinavia and you listen to Savage Garden, you're like, this just sounds like one of those kind of Scandinavian bands. And if you look at like a lot of Kylie's songwriters are Scandinavian, and maybe it's linked to ABBA some way. Because
ABBA's definitely there. They were enormous in Australia, of course.
Yeah.
Muriel's Wedding, etc., etc. Australia's not unique in this, but a lot of countries do tap into that melancholy, which we talk a lot about on this podcast, and I talk a lot about with people who love music, that there is a queerness to that melancholy as well, I think. Yeah.
I always think queer music is best when it's a bit sad, because I think that represents queer life in a way. It's like super amazing, super positive, but there's rarely not a dark side to it, or there's rarely not some trauma that's linked to it.
Chris, I'm going to call a spade a spade. We've known each other for a few years.
I know.
I can't pretend to not know you. Myself and Drew, off of Aura Fixation, we were very lucky enough to have you really before you hit the big time do our podcast artwork. There is no way I can afford you for Tracks of Our Queers. But since that, just a few years ago, you have worked with enormous clients all over the world. You were one of the first people I saw in the pandemic, like getting back into international travel.
Yeah.
You were in London doing stuff with Gay Times.
I think I was on the first flight out of Australia, or pretty much. There was 3 people on it.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
It's a lot of seats for yourself.
Yeah, it was great. I have always traveled. Like, it's growing up in suburbia gives you a different perspective on the planet. So yeah, I was pretty keen to get the F out of Sydney the second I could. And it just so happened that this amazing project came along to do it. And that was that was the first like big installation I did. And it was the first time in my life I ever got jet lag, because I refuse jet lag.
You refuse it.
I refuse it. And I hadn't slept in about a week, and we went to the Gay Times thing with 2 of my friends, Gay Times Honours, which is their like awards night. And I'd done like a big installation in the thing. But it was really funny because I don't watch Drag Race, which is like borderline homophobic, and I'm sorry. But
Thank you for
yeah, for clarifying. And I was with 2 of my friends who are also artists, and every like 3 minutes, just one of them would gasp uncontrollably. And it was just someone from RuPaul. And I'd keep thinking it was like Kylie or like someone of, I mean, not the Drag Race people aren't super famous, but do you know what I mean? Like, I got very excited thinking perhaps it was Kylie Minogue, and it never was. If you're not Kylie Minogue, just what's the point?
Ever since I locked eyes on your art, even years ago, there is a connective tissue of queerness which runs through it. And you've spoken about it many times, but I could see visually the links to icons like Keith Haring, but it's clearly your own distinctive language that you create art with. Do you see any connection with the visual art you create and music?
Yeah, 100%. I always see my work. I always see that it's moving. And if you have a moving image, you normally have to have sound. So in my head, music and image just go together so well, or my work and music go. I love reels on Instagram, because I'd post animations before and I'd be like, but it has no sound, it's so weird. And now I'm like, I can put my favorite song on it. This is great. And I'm not having to pay copyright or anything. So I've always thought, and I think my trajectory going forward, I've started working a bit in music, in live tour graphics and things, and I think I will keep doing that because I love it. I love the energy. I love my work being next to music. I'd love to do music videos, say 10 years down the track. Let's see. That would be the goal.
We're manifesting. Are you listening to when you create?
I have to feel calm in the studio when I'm working. I have one playlist that's about 50 to 100 songs, and I just constantly edit it. I'm quite selective with this playlist, and that's what I listen to most. Or I just need to listen to something that's very calming, that's mainly Madonna or Ariana Grande, because it's so familiar. It kind of just washes over you in the background.
So you've got your 3 choices.
Yep.
Which track did you pick and why?
Okay. I originally picked a different song, and then I realized everything was from at least 10 years ago. And I was like, what are the kids going to think? I have to relate to them somehow. But
Do we have any kids listening?
So the song I have chosen, which was hard, I think, is Brockhampton, Don't Shoot Up the Party. And I love Brockhampton because I think, and I read an interview today of Kevin Abstract, which for those who don't know who Brockhampton are. He's like the architect of it all. I think there's 12 of them or some absurd amount, but he's kind of like the main one. I think that's fair to say. And he said in an interview that he doesn't want to be seen as a gay icon. He just wants to be seen as an icon. And I relate to that so much. Like, I'm so gay. Like, it doesn't get much gayer. But when it comes to expressing myself, I was even thinking today what I'm going to wear to Mardi Gras. And I just can't. I don't have it in me to dress how so many gay boys dress or how many queer people dress. And I always used to be insecure about that. I would be like, I'm not gay enough. Like, why do I not want to dress like this? And
Do you mean skimpy clothing?
yes,
Or
yeah. Basically, like how you imagine people dress for Mardi Gras. I just have such a problem doing it. I don't feel myself when I'm like that. And I'm like, why don't I feel comfortable doing that? I'm so gay. So, and then I realized, I always think if you feel something, probably a lot of other people do as well. And Kevin Abstract saying that he's like, I don't want to be a gay icon, but I'm never going to hide that I'm gay because I'm in this space. It's, like the hip hop space is always been a bit kind of homophobic or very heteronormative. And he's like, I want to be in it and I'm never going to hide who I am, but I'm just not that kind of like camp presenting, or I'm not, all of these things.
Colonized minds by masters and slaves. They both hate niggas and like niggas are same. Homophobic, I tried to gang bang, I tried to get laid, I had to get paid.
And I feel like that resonated with me because I'm always going to talk about being gay or about being queer, and I'm going to put it in my work and go into these places where 10 years ago I wouldn't have said that I was gay. I would have hidden it. I'm fine with putting it in my work, and I'm fine with all of these things. I'm just not great at putting it kind of on my body, I guess. Also, I just love Brockhampton, I think. And I don't mean this in the wrong way. I often find a lot of queer things to be quite unaesthetic. And I feel like Brockhampton is very aesthetic, from the music to album covers to single covers to videos. Like, everything's so considered and artful and beautiful. So I just always have found them such an amazing band. I also listened to a lot of hip hop when I was younger, and I was very aware that I wasn't welcomed there, but I just still really liked it and I was fine with it. I think Brockhampton and obviously Frank Ocean and others were kind of like the first people in the hip hop space to be like, I'm gay or I'm whatever and I'm going to be here. So yeah, this is the hardest one to start with as well, because I feel like the others I've picked have been there since like day one. And this is a newer one, and I think I'm still digesting why I find Brockhampton so fascinating and why I love their music. Sadly, they've broken up now. And I think it's not my favorite Brockhampton song, but it's the one it came out after the Pulse nightclub shooting, and they never said that it was about that, but I think fans just kind of assumed that it was. And it felt like the first song that I resonated with. They're like really talking about being gay in this space where you're just like, or like the dark side of being gay, like the homophobia that's attached to being queer in this space where before you just wouldn't. So that's why I picked Brockhampton. That's why I picked this song.
Interesting. I haven't read this interview that you referenced where Kevin Abstract says that he doesn't want to be a gay icon, just an icon. Of course, many of us can tap into that idea of, I don't want to be labelled as one thing because I am many things, and that does resonate with me. However, you then going on to describe the position he holds in the hip-hop community as being so comfortable and open with his sexuality, to me, kind of by default makes him a gay icon, whether he wants to be or not.
I think that's the irony, yeah.
Yeah, but I really enjoyed listening to this track, and I will continue to listen further. So thank you for introducing something from the children to me.
But they're amazing. If you haven't checked them out, which I'd be very upset, please do.
Which album did you pick, Kris? And please tell us why.
The other two I had to think about a lot. And the album I thought about for less than humanly possible to think about anything. And I, of course, picked Madonna Confessions because it's my coming out album, as it's probably most people my age's coming out album.
Time goes by so slowly. Time goes by so slowly.
Were you out when Confessions on a Dance Floor came out?
I don't think so, no. I was in some spaces, but I was 100% not out at home. And I was 100% not out with any men. There was a few girlfriends I knew who knew, but I don't think I ever told them. I thought, like, we're out and we're dancing to Madonna. Perhaps they've just assumed. Like that. I think that's as far as my brain thought. But yeah, I think I was 16 when it came out. If I'm right.
Do you remember the first time you heard Hung Up?
Yes. The first time I actually ever heard it was the live performance, I think in Lisbon at the VMAs, one of the MTV Awards.
Yeah.
Until that point, I'd always known, I came to Madonna late. I think Confessions is when I really got into Madonna. I remember I was aware of the spectacle of Madonna, but I just wasn't that into it. I don't even know why I watched that MTV show. And I remember her legs. I was like, this woman is so fucking powerful. Like, who is this? I need to know everything. And then I was just obsessed. I remember having that on VCR, which I think that was even late technology then.
I don't know how you acquired a VCR
I
at that
don't
time.
know. Like, I think it was already, and I recorded it and I watched that so many times. And then I had a really old car and it still had cassette, which was even amazing. And I bought Confessions on cassette.
Whoa, what is this?
Which, again, that was like it was only nostalgic. That's the only reason you could still buy a cassette of it. Funnily enough, I think I listened to Isaac the most, and it's not my favorite song at all on the album now, but something about it, I always liked it.
Out of anyone I've spoken to for this podcast so far, the album that you've picked and just the brief story you've told there is perhaps the album that has resonated most closely with me. And this is very much your interview, it's not mine, but you saying things like, you weren't out then, but, you know, you were coming out around that time. You weren't huge with Madonna beforehand, but this was like your entryway. Like this album introduced me to so many different facets of her career that I would go off and discover. So my gateway actually was the Confessions tour. So watching this album,
Did you go to the Confessions tour?
I didn't, because I wasn't a fan then, and I was only like 15 or 16 or whatever.
If I meet someone that went to the Confessions tour, you
give them a slap.
I just want to strangle them. I just can't.
Yes, I know people.
It's my partner. It's a constant battle.
Don't want to hear a bar of it.
Me neither.
Let me just watch the DVD.
Dreadful. And then we watch the DVD, but this is the worst thing. We watch it, and he's like, that was so good.
Oh,
it's infuriating.
I remember, as I'm sure you've seen many times, Live to Tell performance where she's coming up on the crucifix as Jesus, and it's scandalous. Because I wasn't too familiar with that song before, I'm Googling it and I'm like, oh, that's one of her older songs. Oh, she's one of these artists who reinvents her older music to fit with whatever album she's performing at this time. There's a level of artistry there that I appreciate. So you bringing this album is a very special... It's also just a masterpiece, and I still think she's never managed to create an album as good start to finish.
Yeah,
since.
100%. That album is just, you can attack it from all of these things. And I think I always struggle with this in my work. It's like Kris, the gay activist who wants to talk about being queer, and then Kris, the artist who just wants to make artistic work. And I think that album's kind of the same thing. Like if you take away the fact that it's like obviously been this album for so many queer people to connect to, it's also just an unbelievable pop album, like an amazing piece of art. And the music's one thing, but I think just the visual direction of the whole thing is also incredible. And I watched, for research, I did this photo shoot for a job I'm working on, and I watched the Sorry video as research. I was like, this is unbelievably good, and this could come out tomorrow and it would still be... Jump, on the other hand, is maybe dated, but like, you know, Jump, Hung Up, Sorry, I just like the best thing ever. And I don't know, that album is... I also was talking to someone the other day who's like 22, and they were like, yeah, that was my entrance point into Madonna, because I think for a lot of people it still feels like quite a contemporary album.
It does.
So they might find it kind of now, and then, because sometimes it's hard to listen to an 80s album and connect to it. It's like it does feel dated a lot of the time. It does feel, you know, all of these things. Whereas Confessions still feels like it's this incredibly current album, and then it can link a queer person back to this back catalogue of everything. And then I remember when I first moved to London, I was 21 and I was so lonely. Like I had no friends. And I basically sat in my like shitty apartment or flat and I watched the erotica performance on repeat. And I felt safe. Like I felt fine because I was like, well, you know, it's the only way I can relate to religion. I'm not a religious person. And I was like, this is how, how like something can be so like strong in your life that isn't work or like a love or something else. It's like, it's almost weirdly spiritual for me anyway. I mean, Madonna is that anyway, but I think Confessions is just the perfect thing.
It's hard to have a conversation with someone today about Madonna and not reference her age, but I think it's important to call out that when Confessions was produced, she was about 46, 47, which there will be no surprise or shock to me when Beyonce is probably still producing the best music of her career at 47. Yeah. But for Madonna, it was unbelievable. People were like, who is this old lady? She's been called an old lady for 30 years.
Yeah, it's
but
ridiculous.
Who is this old woman who really should be past it by now? She put out the most artistically and commercially successful album that she had done in like 10 years.
Long time, yeah.
And like you said, it still stands
And the
the test of
confidence
time.
to do that, which she's done a gazillion times in her career.
What's your favourite track on the album?
I think Get Together, to be honest. Yeah. It's a good one.
I agree. Kris, the artist you selected, who and why?
This, again, was a very easy one. And before I say it, I'm going to give context to it. But young gay Kris, who lived in a world where visibility was significantly lower than it is now, if not non-existent. And I think as a young gay man, I mean, I was a bit older when I found this artist, but still, I was somewhat out, not fully out. And I think you just seeked outsiders, or you seeked people that didn't fit into what was normal. And I think I found this artist through just being like, they're out there doing their own thing. It doesn't fit into anything else. I relate to that because I haven't really found where I fit in a queer space because there just isn't. There weren't that many out queer artists then. So yeah, my artist is MIA, who's I'm sure a lot of people know as the Sri Lankan British rapper, who hilariously I forgot that she worked with Madonna, which is so obvious. And when you texted me today, I remembered the collaboration, I guess you could call it. I picked MIA because I think outside of Madonna, I think MIA is probably my favorite artist that's ever lived. I just always think MIA was one of those artists who, you know, was outside of what we were used to. She wasn't afraid to talk about things. I'm Aries and I'm opinionated and I like to not shy away from something that's uncomfortable or, you know, all of these things. And so I guess I just gravitated towards that. But she seemed so strong, and I think when I found MIA, I wasn't a strong person. Now I can talk about being gay and I can do all of these things and no, I don't care. I have no... Someone yelled "Pufter" at me the other day and I did not even care. I was like, it's sad that that still exists in the world, but it washes over me like nothing. 18-year-old Kris would have crumbled like a leaf. And so to look at, you know, artists like MIA that from the outside seemed so incredibly strong and were making these insane visuals and sonic statements... Yeah. Like, I couldn't ignore it. And I'm quite maximalist in my work anyway. And so I think...
hadn't picked up on that.
So I think visually I very much gravitated to her. And, you know, I always found that really interesting. And I guess the main reason why I picked her now is because, back to that thing of I just related to her so much as being an outsider because that's just how I saw myself. I didn't think I would fit in. A really long time ago, I wanted to be an actor. Like, I was very, very young. And one of my best friends knew I was gay, and I remember saying, I want to be an actor. And he's like, well, you have to just pretend to be straight then, because the world doesn't want a gay actor, or you'll never be successful. I've never forgotten that. I'm still friends with this person. I love him to death. But at that time, it broke my heart, for lack of a better word. And I was just always looking for people that had made it or become successful when it seemed like all the odds were against them. And I feel like MIA is that, and I watched the documentary again recently on a plane. And if you've not watched the MIA documentary, it's like the most amazing.
What's the name of it?
Matangi Maya MIA, which is her three names. Yeah. Matangi's her birth name. Maya's her. I'm saying it wrong, but I will say it worse if I pronounce it. That's like the English translation, I guess. Matangi Maya, which is her like friend name, and MIA her artist name. But it's a really good documentary. It was made by her best friend, Steve Loveridge, who it's crazy that this happened, but she commissioned him to make the film, but never saw it until it came out. So they premiered it together at Sundance. And obviously it was a way more personal film than what she had wanted. And you watch, there's like some videos on YouTube of her reaction to it. And she's obviously, now she likes it. And she's like, obviously it was good. And she likes her friend and all these things. But I think the initial reaction was like, she kind of says something like, that's my entire family up there. And that's just not like what I wanted. Which is fair. Like, you know, you have your life as an artist and you have your personal life. And you don't always want them to be kind of linked. So yeah, and I think, yeah, I loved the first album, A Ruler. I just had heard nothing, seen nothing like it ever before. I was very young when that came out. By the time Carla came around, I was much more aware of the statements it was making and thinking like, what are statements I want to make, or what do I want to stand for in my life, kind of thing. Because I knew by that point I wanted to be an artist and I wanted to say something. I didn't want to just like paint flowers. And then the Maya album came along and was just like, you know, this kind of crazy sonic madness. Since then, it's just been like an endless stream of, for me anyway, like amazing creative work that I find she's a bit underrated, and I amazingly got to work with her quite recently. And when I quite often would mention it to people, they'd narrow it down to, oh, Paper Planes or, oh, the Super Bowl. And it really upset me because similar to Brockhampton, like, MI is a huge, amazing artist. I just think, yeah, she's just on another level creatively, and how she sees the world is amazing. And she's got a lot of shit lately because she kind of has said a few weird things on Twitter, and she was a bit anti-vax at one point. Or she didn't say she was anti-vax. She said she like was not, you know, like for...
She wasn't pro-vax.
Pro-vax. And as like a turbo pro-vaxxer and like all of these things, like it's hard to see someone. But I've always been, and I do this in every facet of life, I'm like, I think you can't just judge a person by one thing they've done, especially someone like MIA whose career I've been following for like 15 years. If they do one thing you don't agree with, you don't just like go fuck off and put them to the side. You go like, okay, I don't agree with that one thing, but I agree with the 7,000 other things you've done. So it's okay. You know, we'll be on the same page again at one point.
So we're anti-cancel culture.
Yeah, I think it's not good. I mean, I think that's the norm now.
We're cancelling cancel culture.
Yeah, I do feel like people are realizing it's absurd.
Absolutely.
Because it's just not healthy and it's silly. And yeah, I think it's just, and I think MIA is obviously very anti-cancel culture.
I love that you have worked with her recently, because I think I fell in love with her around the second album.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since then, I have been transfixed by how her music sounds like her visuals look.
Yeah.
They're just so in sync and always have been. And you can kind of look at her album covers and hear the music very articulately. Yeah. Did you get to talk to her about your art? Or?
Yeah, it was very surreal. So it was in the middle of the night. She started following me on Instagram and then DM'd me. And you know how you are at the middle of the night. It's already difficult. So I was like, okay, that's just a bit crazy. I don't think I can deal with this. I'll have to reply in the morning. But then, so I went back to sleep and then woke up and I was like, I have to reply now. And all of these things. So obviously I replied. And then she was like, I'd made this poster and she really liked it. And she was like, it's the best thing on the internet. And I think I said something like, you're the best thing on the internet. Yeah. So, and then we kind of like chatted about the project and things. And I ended up doing some visualizers and a poster and stuff for her. So, you know, it wasn't like I was doing the album cover. Just to be in the same sphere or orbit as her is like, for me, like the best thing kind of ever. So it was a wild experience. She called me in the middle of the night and I missed it and panicked again because I was like, how do you talk to this person that you've idolized? And I've had a bad run of meeting people that I've idolized and being very let down. So I was very, very scared to engage, but it's been a wild experience. And I think I worked so hard on what I made for her because I just wanted it to be the best thing ever, because it's like, you get this opportunity to put your mark on a legacy that you've admired is like a very amazing and surreal thing. And I'm very appreciative of when I get opportunities. I'm like, I have to make the most of it. I'm not just like, cool, that's money, next.
No.
Yeah.
Well, you're being trusted with someone's legacy as well.
Yeah, which is a wild thing. But fortunately, I feel like our work went together well in what I made, I think.
Well, Kris, this was wonderful. You spoke a little bit about the people that you've worked with. What does it mean to you now at the stage that you're in of your career, but also the stage of life that you're in your confidence in yourself as a queer person? What does it mean to be so open about your queerness in your art, which is on the world stage?
I always talk about delayed adolescence because I think I massively suffered from it. And I think I was not really comfortable with being queer or talking about it or all of these things till my late 20s, which I see 20-year-olds now being so comfortable. And I'm so jealous because you can't take back time. And that's the one thing I wish I could do. And I link it to visibility and all these things. Like I just wasn't exposed to it. And I wasn't in many places where I felt like I could be. Even when I moved to London, like you don't just, forget the previous 20 years where you thought it wasn't okay to be gay, I think I massively had a delayed adolescence. So I think now I'm revolting against that. And I'm like, I will talk about it. I'm so fine with talking about it, and I will always talk about it because I think there's always a conversation to be had. And I think we put ourselves in bubbles where we forget that people are still suffering, and we live in countries where it's legal or whatever, and there's still so many places that it's not. And I am now aware that I'm in a position where I can talk about it safely, and I'm not going to waste that, I think. And fortunately, I work with people who are, I guess I'm now getting hired. And I feel like I'm very much like Kevin Abstract. I don't want to be known as a gay icon, but I'm very happy to be in the space and talk about it. I just don't want it to be the only thing I'm known for, but I'm happy to be known for it, if that makes sense. I hope that people know me for my work as well, but through that work, I will always talk about it because I think it's important.
Is there a queer charity initiative that you wanted to give a shout out to?
Sure. Well, Minus 18, because I've done a sneaky project with them. I think they do great work. And I also love PFLAG because I think parents get a hard time. Like it's a lot to deal with you having a queer kid, and it's getting easier and all these things. And I think sometimes people are a bit hard on the parents or on the families. It's hard. I get it. Like it's hard for them to deal with it sometimes if they've also not been, like if we've not been, talking about delayed adolescence, add 30 years on that. It can be difficult.
Sure. Thank you. Kris Andrew Small, you are queer. Just checking.
Yeah? A little bit, yeah.
So,
a lot. I am very queer.
Thank you for your tracks.
No worries. Thank you for having me. It's well overdue and I'm very excited.
You can find out more about Kris in this episode's show notes, or you can follow him on Instagram at Kris Andrew Small. This episode was produced, recorded and edited on unceded Gadigal Land by me, Andy Gott. You can email me at tracksofourqueers@gmail.com. You can follow the podcast at tracksofourqueers on social media, and if you're not already, please do subscribe. See you next time.